Hi, I'm Thurop Van Orman. I created Flapjack, and I also did his voice. And if you want 107 more facts, check it out.
Ever wonder what's out at the sea? Sunken treasure? Haunted creatures? What about an island made entirely of candy? The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack tackled these very questions in a way that's both humorous and a bit creepy. Want to know more? I bet you do. Ahoy, mateys. I'm JD with Channel Frederator, and this is 107 facts about Flapjack. Ready for some misadventures? Let's get started. The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack was created by Thurop Van Orman and premiered on Cartoon Network in June of 2008. Before Flapjack, Van Orman worked on other memorable shows like Powerpuff Girls, The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, and Camp Lazlo. Van Orman was inspired to make Flapjack based on a life of adventure as a kid. When he was 13 years old, he moved with his family from Panama City, Florida to Salt Lake City, Utah. He read all the classic adventure books from authors like Jules Verne and yearned to have his own adventure. His dream was to build a hut with his bare hands and live on his own. So, after finishing school, he worked as a janitor, saved up money, bought a ticket to Panama City, and went to Shell Island, a small underdeveloped island between Panama City and the Gulf of Mexico. He packed some rations and actually made it by paddling on a surfboard. When Thurop got to the island, he found it was home to rattlesnakes. Despite that, he managed to build his hut and began to live off the land. Sort of. He had managed to spearfish a manta ray, but even after all that, he had failed to survive. He was starving, blistered, and sunburned. He considers the experience great fodder for storytelling, even though he failed as an adventurer. Shell Island was not the last of Van Orman's adventures. He spent a summer in Mexico and lived in the jungle, but ended up eating out of dumpsters. His perception of life changed after those two adventures. If life didn't go right, or bad things happened, Thurop would go through the thought that he was just having an adventure. And some other of his adventures included being jumped by Mexican gangs at gunpoint, hopping trains with rival gangs, and visiting abandoned Mexican luxury hotels with wild iguanas climbing in and out of the walls. When Thurop was in high school, besides his dreams of being an adventurer, he loved to tell stories through his drawings, and leaned towards becoming a kids' book illustrator. But his parents wanted him to become a businessman and refused to help him go to art school. So he began just taking some stabs at writing and illustrating kids' books, and realized he didn't really have a good grasp on the process. He first became interested in animation after he worked for a video game company called Santero, where he worked on titles like Looney Tunes Racing and Harley Davidson Racing. He decided animation was his path, and his colleagues then pointed him towards Cal Arts. While at Cal Arts, Van Orman interned at the Powerpuff Girls at Cartoon Network. One day while he was sitting in the writer's room, creator Craig McCracken was lamenting about how they were all out of ideas, and how everything had been done. Thurop went home and typed up 6 mini outlines for episodes, and brought them in the next day, and they bought them all. He went from intern to writer, and would eventually become a storyboard artist too. As a student, Thurop pitched Flapjack back in 2001 after he made a Flapjack short that wasn't greenlit. He then created a whole outline and pitch bible with a storyboard, and pitched it again 2 years later. Van Orman was fascinated with stop motion, and he started experimenting with it in high school by building stuff, but he didn't have a camera to capture anything. When he was at Cal Arts, people around him said that stop motion was dead and was too experimental, but that didn't stop Van Orman. When he worked on the Flapjack short, he built the opening sequence himself after Cartoon Network wouldn't give him the money to do it. He later wanted to do the whole show in stop motion, but because he didn't know too much about the process and it would have been very expensive and time consuming, he compromised on mixed media. So the show had elements of 2D, 3D, stop motion, and a dash of live action. The very first doodle of Flapjack had him riding inside a mechanical bubby back in 2001. While the final version was a sassy blue whale, the first episode did feature a race between Bubby and a mechanical whale. By 2002, Van Orman had decided that Bubby was going to be a real whale, not a mechanical submarine one. You can find this concept art for the final designs of Flapjack and Bubby on his DeviantArt today. According to some of the early concept art for Flapjack, the knuckles used to have a more human-like form, with a full, rounded chin and a wider body shape. Over time, he just started to lose his limbs and looked more square. Flapjack, however, almost looked less human. In what could have been his final design, Flapjack was missing ears and had a permanent crazy look on his face. In 2002, Thurop created his first ever drawing of Stormalong Harbor. He later posted it online in 2008, along with a note saying that he was in the middle of uploading development art to MySpace. Huh, remember MySpace? One of Van Orman's favorite drawings of the candy barrel can also be seen on the animator's DeviantArt. It has light bouncing off of the water puddles, candy barrel, and everything else. But it was never used because reflecting light had to be animated on the characters, and that could be tricky. So you might think that Flapjack is a reference to, well, Flapjacks, but that's not entirely true. Van Orman had a dream once when he was a teenager that his name was Captain Flapjack, and he had a flying motorcycle that would break in midair. That name stuck with him ever since. While Van Orman meant for the name Flapjack to reference his childhood nickname, there's actually a marine connection through a type of seaweed called Flapjack seaweed. Van Orman said it was just a coincidence that happened to work out. So if he named himself Captain Flapjack, where did the name Knuckles come from? Van Orman's grumpy brother would often call himself Buster Knuckles. He also partially inspired Knuckles' personality as well, since Van Orman considered him to be a grump with a heart of gold. Knuckles' design and part of his personality was based on Brian Doyle Murray's character in Get a Life. After watching the film as a teenager, Van Orman wanted to make a character that was like that. So, where did Stormalong come from? Thurop got the name from his older brother Johnny, who suggested it. Stormalong is the name of an American folk hero named Alfred Bulltop Stormalong, who is the subject of many nautical tall tales. Alfred Stormalong was known as a sailor and a giant with a ship so big the mast had hinges on it to avoid clipping the moon. Before the show started, Van Orman had never seen SpongeBob, so Knuckles had huge pincers like Mr. Krabs, as seen in early versions of Knuckles' design. Of course, he didn't want to cause a mix-up, so he changed it. Now, the pirate has claws instead. While Flapjack was largely based on young Van Orman, there were a few design changes throughout the years. Want to see them yourself? Well, Van Orman posts early Flapjack art on his DeviantArt website for fans to see. He actually found it difficult to figure out the characters of Knuckles and Flapjack while he drew them. Craig Kelman, the character designer for Dexter's Lab and the Powerpuff Girls, helped Van Orman out with the design. Thurop got a lot of ideas for characters by people watching. Ever wonder why Peppermint Larry and Dr. Barber are so gummy? Well, Orman would look at these little quirks people had and exaggerate them in caricatures. Thurop set out to have Flapjack and Knuckles live in their own little world. That's why the young boy looks normal in a world of harsh-looking, gross people. He wanted to show the contrast of life's tough realities and a boy's innocent sense of adventure. Before he began working on Flapjack, Van Orman was a bit worried about Cartoon Network's guidelines. Before the premiere, Stu Snyder, Time Warner Turner's then head of animation, laid out some guidelines for kids' television at the time. He said, in short, that he didn't want any weird material that could potentially upset parents. Despite this, Van Orman said Stu was behind Flapjack from day one, so it all worked out. Given these guidelines, Van Orman and his crew naturally fought with standards and practices a lot. Van Orman would often slip things into scripts and push the envelope, despite the higher-ups wanting more family-friendly content. Flapjack was a huge hit with teenagers and college kids. Van Orman believed that if you get the older brothers and sisters watching, younger siblings will want to watch too. Makes sense. When Flapjack was greenlit, Thurop brought some of his former Camp Lasso colleagues aboard the new team. One of them was another storyboard artist that he wanted as his creative director, J.G. Quintel. Flapjack was Quintel's first show as a director. Before that, he had just done storyboards, but now he was in the writer's room doing animatics and working with a lot of people he went to school with, like Pendleton Ward, Alex Hirsch, and Kent Osborne. Originally, actor Paul Rubens, aka Pee Wee Herman, was going to voice Flapjack despite never auditioning. He was scheduled to record, but he never showed up. Thurop just went in and recorded his voice, and the crew ended up using it from that on. Makes sense that they have similarities in their personality. Thurop said that like Flapjack, he is oblivious to danger and that the younger version of himself would be just like Flapjack. Van Orman said he was willing to provide the voice of Flapjack, but was scared to do it at first. He said that getting a show picked up felt easier than entering the voice acting field. Of course, when it's your own show, you make the final call. Van Orman understandably had some difficulty doing the voice of Flapjack and directing at the same time. He explained that while he loved doing the voice and wanted to do it, he understood it would be difficult to act with the other voice actors and direct them at the same time. Clearly it all panned out, but to see Van Orman run between booths would be a treat all on its own. You may have heard Flapjack's voice in other notable shows. Van Orman lent his voice to the pint-sized psychic little Giddy in Gleeful in Gravity Falls. The voice actors got so much praise for their roles in the show. Roz Ryan, the voice of Bubby, said that she received more fan mail for voicing the motherly whale than any other character she's played. Keep in mind that Ryan had voiced the Muse of Comedy from Hercules and Cake from Adventure Time's Fiona and Cake. You often hear about voice actors improvising lines for animated shows, but on Flapjack, that was rarely the case. In fact, the only character who regularly improvised was Steve Little's character, Dr. Barber. While everyone was thinking of their lines coming up, Steve would often just ramble on. Steve Little auditioned for 5 roles that included Peppermint Larry and 2 other deckhands, until going on for Dr. Barber. The part called for the Doctor to be a sophisticated with a slight lisp. Little thought, oh, that's too much for me, and decided to go for his signature slow drawl. It was a success and had the crew rolling on the floor with his audition. Brian Doyle Murray, the voice of Knuckles, has had a long list of voicing pirates and sea folk. He played Salty from Family Guy and the Flying Dutchman from SpongeBob SquarePants. When Cartoon Network said no to Flapjack's pilot episode getting an opening sequence, Thurop stayed up all night one day creating a mock-up and a song to try to win the studio over. And it worked. After getting approval, Van Orman spent 2 to 3 months working 16 to 18-hour days to create the entire opening sequence from start to finish. All without pay. That's dedication. An interesting effect the show managed to pull off was in the opening when Bubby is floating on waves. In reality, they're paper cut-out waves. Screen Novelties used watercolored paper and scanned it in After Effects program and layered Bubby over it. One thing that sets Flapjack apart from Cartoon Network's other shows are the interesting expressions. Van Orman recalled the artists on Powerpuff Powerpuff Girls had to be on model all the time, causing things to feel stiff. He felt the show might have been even better if the characters didn't use stock expressions. So for Flapjack, he told the animators just trace the storyboard's artist's work. Amazingly, Van Orman never received a note from the network telling him he was off model. Of course, there are some trade-offs to working off model. Van Orman said he was sometimes given poor drawings, and he would have to go back and change them all before they went overseas to be animated. Some things that ended up in the show were unplanned. Van Orman and the crew naturally made a few caricatures of other crew members, and at one point, Warden Van Orman doodled a stock merman that had the face of fellow writer Mike Roth. One thing led to another until Mike the Merman ended up in the show. Van Orman's workspace was dubbed the Fun Factory by his peers. When working on Flapjack, Van Orman created a sense of safety and experimentation with incentives to try new things, regardless of whether they failed or not. When working under Van Orman, the motto was always, try it and see what happens. At Comic-Con 2008, Osborne explained in the Flapjack panel that everyone contributed to the writing for the show. They would gather in the writers and throw around jokes and ideas, and see what made people laugh. To keep the Fun Factory fun, the writers and storyboards had several games to help write and come up with characters. In one game, someone would write down 3 sentences, then pass it to the next person who would add another 3 sentences, and it kept going. The artist got in on the fun too. They had a similar game where one person would doodle a head, and the next person would draw the torso, and so on. Way to keep things fun and fresh. Things in the writer's room of Flapjack were obviously pretty relaxed. In addition to seeing who can make who laugh, the writers and Van Orman would reminisce about childhood friends and memories, and sometimes make an episode based off those conversations. Some of the episodes have been straight up autobiographical, like the episode Diamonds in the Stuff. According to Ellen Van Orman, Thurop's mother, her youngest son would go digging in storm drains looking for diamonds, as boys do, you know. Rather than focus testing like normal TV shows, Van Orman and the crew were the target audience. When coming up with ideas, it felt like a contest to see who could get to make the others laugh. Now, one might think that Orman's process is all storyboards, but in reality, he started with doodles. When thinking of a story, Orman will doodle with a concept in mind, and then flesh it out with a story in mind for what he wants to do. Through his multiple readings of story, Van Orman has devised a checklist that he feels hits all the strong points when making an episode or a movie. An example would be something like making sure the characters have a goal by the end of Act 1. The music for Flapjack was composed by Dan Cantrell. There's a demo reel available online that features the extended opening and music from the show. Since Flapjack, Cantrell has had projects with both Pixar and Disney. Another notable figure in the Flapjack crew is Kent Osborne. While he didn't go off to make his own shows like Hirsch, Quintel, or Ward, Osborne was the head of story for Adventure Time and the voice director for Steven Universe. And on Flapjack, he worked as both story editor and voice director. The episode Schooled began with the fact that there was no school in Stormalong. The point of the episode was to show how different Flapjack's life was from other kids. They started with that simple idea, and in real Fun Factory fashion, they just kept adding things from there. Some of the early episodes have a strong moral lesson to it, like the dangers of boasting and eavesdropping. Van Orman tried to get away from that in later seasons and said that he used moral lessons in the beginning just to keep track on the show. So, what's the deal with all the candy? Oddly enough, Thurop doesn't eat a lot of candy, and it isn't Flapjack who is the obsessive one, but Knuckles. Van Orman decided that candy would be a suitable vice for a pirate to have on a TV show, and of course, Flapjack is into whatever Knuckles is into. Every so often, Flapjack would sing little segments, like the 2 pieces of candy jingle. Van Orman admits that the whole thing started way back when he started dating his future wife. She would often come home from work and talk about her day so much that Thurop would have to interject with singing little bits just to get a word in edgewise. Van Orman stated that Bubby is the maternal protective force. Alongside Knuckles, the two are a balance of what life is like in Van Orman's mind. Bubby is an informal Yiddish term for grandmother. This is a fitting name for Bubby, as Flapjack's motherly figure. When asked how old Flapjack and Knuckles were, Van Orman didn't really know. He thinks that Flapjack is somewhere between 5 and 10, and Knuckles was in his 40s. People often wonder how Knuckles and Flapjack met. While there's an episode where Bubby and Flapjack meet, Knuckles just appears. But in the original extended opening of the show, it does explain how Flapjack and Knuckles met. He was lost at sea drowning, and Flapjack helped him into Bubby's mouth. The two have been adventurers ever since. Flapjack is immune to the plague. In the episode Knuckles is a dirty rat, the people of Stormalong Harbor get infected by the bubonic plague from a rat. By the end of the episode, Flapjack needs to give blood in order to make an antidote. The episode Pan Fake was inspired by someone attempting to copy Flapjack. Quintel and Osborne wrote and storyboarded an episode when they found out another studio was working on a parallel to Flapjack. Not cool, other studio. In the episode Knuckles is a dirty rat, the plague victims had it bad. Van Orman and the team really thought about how gross the victims would look. At first, they decided to leave it at coughing and scratching, but that was too boring. So they upped the ante until standards and practices told them to tone it down. Toward the end of Whale Times, Knuckles has a particular laugh where people can hear him say "Har Har Thursdays." Conveniently, Har Har Thursdays was the Cartoon Network segment that the Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack aired on. Van Orman's peers hold him in high regards. Brian Mann, a storyboard artist hired by Van Orman, commented that Van Orman's characters were so distinguished from others. He felt like he'd met them before just because they were so genuine. Van Orman was very supportive of his staff's work. When he was working on Powerpuff Girls, he always wondered what would happen when the show ends, which pushed him to work on his own materials. So when Flapjack got rolling, he supported Quintel and Ward's efforts to make something of their own. You could say that he let his little birds out of the nest and helped usher in a new era of animation. Van Orman posted a basic structure of storytelling on his DeviantArt for growing creators to learn from. It follows a 3-act structure and gives some examples regarding where the story should go at certain points in a given episode. There have been other guests that have lent their talents to the show. For the musical episode All Hands on Deck, Isaac Brock, the Modest Mouse frontman and fan of the show, sang an extended version of the opening theme. In 2009, Flapjack background artist Chris Rossack won an Emmy for Outstanding Individual Achievement in Animation. Flapjack was also nominated for an Annie Award for Outstanding Direction in a television production for the episode Candy Casanova. Nice job, Quintel. Adventure Time creator Pendleton Ward worked as a writer for several notable Flapjack episodes, like Sea Legs and Kid Nichols. When Flapjack ended, Ward invited his old boss Van Orman to be the showrunner on Adventure Time. Ward learned how to run a show from Van Orman and Flapjack. When making Adventure Time, Ward adopted the concept of having it be a storyboard-driven show, where the storyboard artist gets to write and draw out every expression in the episode. As if Flapjack didn't spark enough genius shows, Alex Hirsch, creator of Gravity Falls, was also a writer and storyboard artist on Flapjack. He worked with Pendleton on Sea Legs, wrote the episode Sea Urchins, and many more. Van Orman has had a variety of influences on his work. In addition to his brother Johnny, Van Orman is inspired by artists like Gary Larson, Jim Henson, Steve Hillenburg, and his old boss Craig McCracken. Now you'd think that with people like Steven Hillenburg and Craig McCracken influencing you, Thurop watched a fair amount of animation. Well, while he admits watching a regular amount of TV as a kid, like the Smurfs and He-Man, but at age 13 he stopped watching TV altogether. He explained that TV inspired him to go have real adventures. Van Orman literally has the sea next to his heart. For the show and his love of adventure, Van Orman has a tattoo of a ship and the word Eventyrr, which is Danish for adventure. Looks like Flapjack has a bit of knuckles in him. Van Orman is the man with the little girl's voice. If you ever wanted to see him doing the ballad, A Man with a Little Girl's Voice, there's a studio recording of Thurop sporting a black leotard singing the song featured in the episode Something's Amiss. It's in a special feature on the Flapjack DVD titled Adventures in Singing. Van Orman lent his Flapjack voice for a few Cartoon Network video games. Flapjack made an appearance in Cartoon Network's Punch Time Explosion, as well as the short-lived Cartoon Network RPG Fusion Fall. When asked what his favorite episode was, Van Orman said Kid Nichols was his favorite, but he quickly added, "But every week I would have a new favorite, because picking a favorite episode is like picking your favorite child. Impossible!" The final episode of Flapjack aired on August 30th, 2010, and was titled Fish Out of Water. The final scene of the show features Knuckles and Flapjack becoming real people. Knuckles was played by Van Orman, and his son Leaf played Flapjack. For the final episode, Van Orman had to shave his hair and beard to play Knuckles. Now remember, Van Orman voices Flapjack, so you have Orman playing the live-action Knuckles voicing Flapjack, lip-synced over by his son and Murray voicing Knuckles. Did you get all that? When Flapjack ended, Van Orman went through a mini artistic crisis. Flapjack was a show he always wanted to make his whole life. It embodied all the things Van Orman strived for: adventure and love of the sea. To put it simply, Van Orman was lost before finding his next adventure landscape, the forest. While Van Orman has had a steady career in animation, some nights he would go back to his roots as a bum. One night in France, he was attending the Annecy Film Festival. He couldn't sleep due to jet lag, so he took a walk in the middle of the night and got locked out of his hotel room. He decided to just sleep in a pile of garbage with a cardboard insulation, like any regular patron of Stormalong Harbor. Flapjack ended in part because a lot of the mentioned artists and writers went off to do their own things. When Quintel, Ward, and Hirsch went off to make their own shows, the show came to a close. Programming at Cartoon Network really changed after Flapjack. During the time period between Flapjack was airing, the normal ratings for kids was TVY7. Now that shows like Flapjack came and went, the network has changed its attitude with programming, and now Cartoon Network has allowed a wider variety of shows with different ratings. Van Orman is not above getting his fist dirty. On his old DeviantArt, Thurop recounts a scene where he and Cartoon Network exec Nick Weidenfeld brawled out in the streets of New York. Apparently, it wasn't a harsh fight, but there was some bloodshed. Good times? We don't recommend you do this. Van Orman's kids follow in their father's footsteps. Van Orman's kids, Leaf and Hazel, made a short stop-motion film called Chomp and Finn. The short tells the story of Finn the fish trying not to get eaten by Chomp the shark. Spoiler alert, Finn gets eaten. Unfortunately, the show hasn't had reruns since its finale. Apart from DVDs, the only place dedicated and new fans can watch Flapjack episodes is on Hulu+. Come on, Cartoon Network and Boomerang, we want to experience the adventures of our two favorite sailors again. Cartoon Network had a block on their channel called Wedgies that were made up of shorts from different series. Flapjack was one of them, but the pilot episode and a short titled Flapjack and Toneil that were set to air on Wedgies never aired. The reason is unknown, but Flapjack and Toneil were later seen airing in Europe as well as on YouTube until it was removed. What about the pilot episode, you ask? It never ended up being aired anywhere. The only proof that Flapjack ever had a pilot episode is in a short segment that was shown during an interview Cartoon Network had with Van Orman. If you're curious about what happened on Flapjack's pilot, you can get a peek at a scene from it, or, well, a single sketch of a scene, on Van Orman's DeviantArt page. There's a posted drawing of Flapjack being punched by a giant octopus tentacle. Van Orman stated that the pilot never aired because it simply wasn't very good. Ever wanted to be Flapjack? You can in Cartoon Network's game TKO, Titanic Kung Fu Bot Offensive. His moves include Hey Bubby, in which he throws Bubby at opponents, Flap Flop, in which he headbutts his enemy, and Friendship, a super move that involves Flapjack summoning a giant ship that crashes toward an opponent. If you want to play even more Flapjack-inspired games, the Cartoon Network website has 3. They are Adventure Bound, in which you gain points by having Bubby shoot Flapjack in the air to get treasure, Bottle Cappin', in which you fling Flapjack around obstacles to get bottle caps, and Thrills and Chills, where you have to safely maneuver Flapjack across a snow-capped course. Simple, but great fun. Flapjack is so popular that he makes a cameo in a webcomic. Artist Vincent Yo, otherwise known as Bleedman, currently has an ongoing webcomic known as Powerpuff Girls Doujinshi, which can be read on Snafu Comics. It's a what-if story, telling what would happen if all of Cartoon Network's characters live in the same universe. In the chapter, I'm Not Your Boyfriend, Flapjack makes a cameo in Samurai Jack's kendo class. In an interview with our very own Channel Frederator, Van Orman revealed that he thinks Flapjack took a lot of inspiration from the faces his son Leaf made. They both share a big, hearty smile. Flapjack is known for its comedy as well as its creepy characters and visuals, like the 38-year-old man-child and the gray cat with sharp teeth and no eyes. This was because the show wanted to evoke a sense of comedy that, according to Van Orman, makes you feel a bit uncomfortable and then hits you with a great joke. Flapjack has spawned some popular internet memes and GIFs. A viral one is a scene where Flapjack tells Bubby how he misses Knuckles. Bubby answers with a simple, I don't. Both their faces are priceless. Another, perhaps less popular GIF, involves a scene where Flapjack asks the Sky Maid if his wishes will come true, even the scary ones. The Sky Maid's voice takes a quiet, deep turn as she answers in the affirmative. Unexpected? Yeah, which is why this scene became so popular. Have you ever thought that Peppermint Larry sounded familiar? Like a certain Bravo? Well, you're not wrong. Jeff Bennett, who voices Larry, was also the voice of Johnny Bravo himself. Wrap your mind around that. Dr. Barber's character may have been inspired by barber surgeons from medieval Europe. Barber surgeons were a common profession back then, and this was especially true during war times, as they were responsible for looking after the soldiers. As part-time barbers and part-time doctors, barber surgeons did everything from cutting hair to performing surgeries and amputating limbs. Due to a lack of medical knowledge, many of the surgeries led to death, which would explain Dr. Barber's obsession with surgeries and the sheer number of people he's murdered. You won't catch me in his office. When the series reached its 2nd season, the show shifted its focus from Flapjack's adventures to character building. The art also saw some changes, as did the humor, which is more low-key than blunt like it was in the 1st season. Laugh tracks appeared in a few episodes in the 2nd season. According to Van Orman, the laugh tracks were added to 2 freelance boards that didn't quite fit the tone of the show, but Cartoon Network wanted to air them anyways, so I added the laugh tracks thinking it would be funny. Everyone hated it though. Peppermint Larry's wife, Candy Wife, usually appears as though she's created through claymation or CGI. However, she was drawn in cartoon style for the episode I See You. Yep, and we'll see ya, cause we're done. Once again, I'm JD, and thanks for watching 107 Facts About Flapjack. Which episode's your favorite? Which character? Comment below and let us know. Don't forget to click that bell icon to become part of the notification squad. We have new videos dropping every day, so be sure to subscribe to Channel Frederator, your Cartoon Central on the internet.